Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. Before we start today, I'm excited to share some news about the podcast with you. I've really been thinking about how we can continue to support each other in our queer communities more. So I'm asking each guest to name a nonprofit of their choice, and I will make a donation in their name. But that's not all. This podcast has been a labor of love, and I don't want to sell advertising on the show because I don't want to get distracted from the important conversations we have here. I want to support our communities, and this is where you come in. I have set up a Patreon account at patreon.com/queerspirit. There are 4 levels of patronage to choose from, which offer gratitude gifts such as thank you shoutouts on the show, a sticker or enamel button with the Queer Spirit logo, and access to a live monthly meditation group. All Patreon funds remaining after the basic production costs will be added to the nonprofit donations. So go to patreon.com/queerspirit and help me to support our queer communities. My guest today is Marc Boone. Marc is a wizard and the founder of the Academy of Magical Thinking. The Academy helps grown-ups connect with their inner kiddo. Marc got his training at Parsons School of Design, and he has worked as an elementary school art teacher. Today we talk about the power and importance of fairy tales and myth and bringing magical thinking into our everyday lives. Marc shares some of his favorite stories and how they inspire him to bring the joy of dramatic play to kids and adults alike. To see some of his art and magical video stories, visit Marc on Instagram at Inner Kiddo. That's INNERKIDDO. Hi, Marc. Welcome to the show.
Hey there, Nick. Thank you.
So I'm really excited to have you here because I've actually been following you on Instagram for a while. And I thought we would start out by having you just tell us a little bit more about how you got started with storytelling and magical realism.
Well, I think I got started with it when I was a kid. So most of my stuff is dealing with like fairy tales, and I try to gear it towards fairy tales for adults because I'm inspired by my youth and the little stories that I used to hear there. For example, nursery rhymes, fairy tales, legends and myths. Those were like my first romantic novels. Those were my first comedies. They were my first foray into literature. So now as an adult, it's something that I'm still completely drawn to. And yeah, I still use it. I use it to teach. I'm a teacher, and I use it with my students to inspire storytelling and magical thinking, and also use it with adults. I use the concept of going back into our childhood. I use that with adults to just inspire their magical thinking.
Did you have any favorite stories or fairy tales growing up?
Of course I did. So I'm a cliche. So it was really Cinderella. It was really Snow White. Yeah, those were the ones. And then later on, in my 20s, it was a Little Mermaid. So obviously it was a lot of Disney, and that always kind of inspired me and ignited my imagination. Was also, Disney's been around since I was a child, so it's followed me from a baby until now. So I mean, that's a presence and a history in my life, which is, it's just amazing. And yeah, so those are my favorites. And my favorite nursery rhyme is Georgie Porgy, and Kiss the Girls. I mean, Georgie Porgy. And what's my favorite? Legends. Oh, I love Greek mythology. So yeah, I really deal with that kind of mythology, nursery rhymes, and fairy tales.
And so you talked about using stories and fairy tales for teaching. Was there certain lessons or something from some of those stories and myths and fairy tales that really stuck out to you as a child?
Well, it was, and this is why I wanted to kind of change the narrative, because the narrative when I was a kid is you had to be, beautiful. So things would work out with you if you was beautiful, if you were white. That was the narrative too. And so definitely when I'm working now with kids, I'm working with a very inclusive, diverse audience. So I certainly want them to be included in the fairy tale. See, I never felt included in the fairy tale, even though it sparked my imagination and all the romanticism and created all this kind of magical thinking. But within those fairy tales and and legends and everything that I was reading, there was no Black or queer heroes. So, this is just always the state. So we always have to inject ourselves into the story. So I just wanted to go back to the roots of where storytelling began for me, which is with fairy tales, and put our characters or put our heroes, our queer and, diverse heroes into the story so that we all have a hero to root for at the earliest of stages and ages.
It's interesting, as you are talking about this, I'm reflecting on like, what are the stories that I was really into as a kid and what are the ones that still sort of stick out to me now? And I'm, the two that I think of right away are Jack and the Beanstalk and Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, I love that one too.
And Alice in Wonderland has been like a really favorite of mine. And, in undergrad, I studied graphic design and I did my final project was sort of based on the idea of Alice in Wonderland. And thinking about it as you're talking about representation, especially with Alice in Wonderland, well, and also with Jack and the Beanstalk, is that it wasn't about romantic relationships and love and that kind of thing. So I think that it was easier for me to sort of think of myself, whatever level of awareness as a little kid I was aware of being queer, that I could sort of see myself in that situation and really learn from that, especially with Alice in Wonderland sort of feeling like, a sort of diminutive girl and not really knowing anything. And then by the end, she's more empowered and she stands up to the Queen of Hearts and she sort of fights her way through and stands up to, these scary monsters and that kind of thing. And also the ideas of nature and animism and animals. And, it wasn't about, there's a lot of diversity there in terms of like, it's not about like, which animal race or what your skin tone is or anything like that. They were all just sort of like there.
The Alice in Wonderland is an interesting fairy tale. It's hard to even, but I didn't love that one. But it's so interesting that you would say that about it doesn't have the typical love interest, right? So there's no prince that is being sought after, but there is the quest. That's the thing about a fairy tale and a legend is the hero has to go on a quest and has to, be successful. If it's a fairy tale, it has to be successful. But that's the thing but these things ignite that youthful spirit in you, right? You have to go back to a very youthful time in order to recall when you first was reading those or the first impressions you had. And that's where I like to get people, at that little tender age and that little tender stage. And fairy tales were really, that was the thing that they were reading. That was it. I mean, what else was I reading at that point or being read to, because it started, the stories are, read to me because I started hearing them before I could actually read.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of having stories read to us, when I first found you on your account on Instagram, you were doing what you were calling bedtime stories for queer folks.
That's right.
Which I just loved. I loved watching you like laying in bed and sort of reading a book, and it just looked so cozy. And I was just like, oh, this is so sweet. Can you share a little bit like what inspired you to do that?
Yes, of course. Well, again, it would really be about like putting us, when I say us, I'm talking about queer and diverse people in the story. So I had stories that little fairy tales or nursery rhymes that did that they put the hero, it was a queer hero. And I did those in my little bedroom and I would read them because those are little stories that I would have loved to have been told. Some of them are, but they're made for adults now. So this is the tricky part that I've always been questioned about. Is it for kids or is it for adults? So my content is created for grownups, but it is gentle enough for your inner kiddo. So that means that I work in a space, a time frame where it was before sex. So when I was reading fairy tales, I was not thinking about having sex with these people. I was thinking about holding their hands. I was thinking about cuddling. I was thinking about taking walks. And I didn't even know like what Cinderella and the prince did once they got married. I just assumed that they were like buddies. And when I watched I Love Lucy and shows at that time, they slept in separate beds. So it was just like, this was like, I had sleepovers and I had my buddies over. So I assumed that once you at that stage, you just have a buddy that is a permanent sleepover buddy. And obviously a little bit more affection because obviously the prince did kiss her and everything, get a little excited, but I don't know what that meant. So anyway, so my period is before the sexual thing. So I don't try to do sexy, but I do try to do romanticism and a little bit of fun and a little bit of twist on the fairy tale. A little queer twist. But those stories, I thank you for sharing your interest in those stories. And those stories will continue. It's just that I just couldn't keep writing them fast enough.
So you wrote all those, I was going to ask.
Yes. That's all my original material. Most of the stuff on my Instagram is my original thoughts, except for the music. I'm always using other people's music. But yeah, those were my original stories, and I want to get back to them, so I just haven't been able to write enough of them because they still fit into, though what I was doing before was called Bedtime Stories for Queer Folks, it still fits into the theme of what I'm doing now. And basically, the only reason I haven't continued that was because I just haven't written. But what hasn't really continued, and when it was called Bedtime Stories for Queer Folk, I started out as an art account, so rarely did I do those little postings when I was reading a bedtime stories, but most of it, 90% of it was my artwork. And it was, African fairies or African mermaids or Latino fairies, and just like really and white. I mean, it was like inclusive. It was not supposed to be one, but it was supposed to really show a spectrum, Asian, everybody that is in kind of my little New York City world. I mean, when you live in New York City, you just live in a dynamic place. It's a really proper place for cultural diversity, like unlike any other place. So I know people say you have to speak of what you know, but if you're living in certain sections, you might not know anybody but people like yourself or maybe one other type of person. But in New York City, it is just ridiculously diverse. So unless you are really insular or prejudice, you would come in contact and would be friends with people other than you. So I just wanted to show that kind of representation.
Yeah, that was also something that I really loved about all of that work and especially there are still some of your still drawings and that kind of thing, paintings that are, yeah.
Yes, I still do. It's all part of it. It's all, the art is all inclusive, the arts and craft, the dramatic play. So you'll see little skits in there sometimes. So what I've done is I've taken the things that I do in my school as an art teacher and applied it for grownups and as a play date. So for example, in school as a teacher, we do a lot of dramatic play with the kids. We let them imagine what they want to be and then set up something and let them explore that avenue. So that's great for adults. Why should kids have, we've stopped doing it as adults, as some of us have. So I incorporate dramatic play for when I hang out with my adult friends, and that's what the Academy of Magical Thinking is. So dramatic play, obviously with my kids and my students, we do a lot of art, we do a lot of storytelling. So I do that with adults. So I bring what I do in my classroom with young kids into my home, what I do with adults. And that's what the Academy of Magical Thinking is really to explore that inner kiddo and grown-ups. And because I have so much experience working with kids, I just have a lot of credential. I have a lot of street cred. I mean, not street cred, but I have a lot of, magical thinking cred. I work with kids.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for our listeners, I wonder if you can just paint a picture of some of the videos that you have been doing lately, just so they can get an idea. And then, after they listen to this, they can go check it out online somewhere and share get a better understanding.
I'm looking at them because I'm actually looking at my Instagram account to see what kind of videos. Okay, so lately, so there's a theme. So I might do a lot of different things, but the theme really is magical thinking and simple living and lifestyle and how to apply. So my term of magical thinking, or since I call myself a wizard, and how I practice everyday magic is enjoying and being in tune and part of nature, or in tune and part of what is present in my life and making that a magical experience. So whether that's hanging out with friends or whether that's gardening. So there's a lot of dramatic play, I'll say that. So you'll see me as a character and doing lots of different things. There's also a lot of me in nature, mixing up with nature, me doing a lot of my artwork, because as you said, I started out as an art account and I am still an artist. So art lends itself is a big part of my account.
Yeah, I loved the video that you did where it looked like you were painting your kitchen and you made it look like a forest.
Yes. Well, what I've been doing, that's a good thing. Thank you, Nick. That helps. What I've been doing, a part of some of my recent posts is I've been enchanting each room in my house. So as I started to think, well, where does a wizard live? And what does a wizard's environment and space look like? So you can see me, I know the audience can, but you can see part of my background and you can see there's some dragon wings, there's lots of curtains and some glitter. So I've enchanted this room. I've enchanted my bedroom. I've enchanted my kitchen. I've enchanted the bathroom. I've enchanted, and what that basically means is that I've given it a little bit of element of color and fairy tale and whimsy. So each room has gone over a whimsical makeover, and part of that is in my Instagram account. So you'll see some of those makeovers. You'll see me in my garden. That was a group. I just loved it. That was a great makeover for me because I was going to leave the backyard garden until next year. And then I had a friend, a little fairy, and she was so beautiful, and she started helping me. She said, look, there's no reason not to clean up this area. And then once I had started, then the whole place got an enchanted makeover. So yeah, those are some of the you'll find.
Yeah. But I just love how you are so creative. It seems like you bring all these different elements. You have, video and music, but then you have your visual art. And I don't know if you have a background in fashion, but, there's definitely some costumery there, and it looks like you invite a lot of friends over and you dress them up and you're like, let's do this little play. It's kind of like what little kids would do. It's like, let's come over and let's do a play, or let's make believe and pretend. And yeah.
Well, exactly. Well, you remember the Little Rascals, don't you?
Yeah.
So they would always be, Alfalfa would be putting on a play and Darla would be singing. I mean, this is what you do. It really is a testament to, or a throwback to, our early childhood play dates with our friends and everything. So when my friends come over, I call it a play date. Yeah, and we just we dress up if they're into it. So I have some friends that are not into it. So I'm always kind of respectful. I've actually had interventions. They say, enough with the play. So, okay. So I have to always be careful just not to have an agenda with my friends, right? So, because this is not everybody's thing. So, but when it works, it just works so magically when people are into it, and then, the costumes, and then they inhabit the character, and it just becomes so much fun. So that's what you'll see a lot too. You'll see me and my friends having little play dates, dressing up. And as far as the fashion, I was so lucky. I thought about it when I started thinking, okay, I'm the Academy of Magical Thinking, I'm a wizard. I said, well, if I'm a character, I have to have a costume. So I was really fortunate to know a fashion designer, and I just said, I want my costume to be a onesie. So in most of these videos, or not in most of them, I don't even know, but a lot of them, you're going to see me in a onesie. And she has made 12 different onesies. I said, okay, I need to live and die in this onesie, meaning I need a onesie for every occasion. If I'm going someplace fancy to a opera or to a wedding, I need a onesie that's going to be appropriate. If I'm hanging out in the ditches, I need a onesie that's going to be appropriate. So she's created 12 different onesies. I'm actually wearing a onesie right now. I love this one. It's so cozy. And that's part of, I don't know if that's, I guess it is fashion, but it's part of the fashion. It's totally part of my character wardrobe.
And I love that you're wearing a pink onesie and you have pink headphones that match right now.
That is crazy. I guess I ordered them both, but it just kind of happens like that sometimes. I love it.
So you mentioned The Little Mermaid, and I also noticed that, further back on your Instagram account, you went through a period where there was a lot of mermaid art, or merperson art, I guess we could say.
Merfolk.
Merfolk, there you go. That's the gender inclusive term. Merfolk.
Exactly.
So I wonder if there's something specific that you feel really drawn to merfolk about.
No, I do not. But actually, when I did do it, I began to be more drawn to them, because as you draw them, you start researching more and you start reading more stories, and you start getting more involved in the folktale and the folklore and the fairy tale of it. So as I go on any creature, whether it's a troll, because I was doing trolls for a while too. So, and I'm doing Halloween, so I'm starting getting a little bit, dark. People, it's crazy, Nick. People want darkness. I give them sweetness. They want darkness. So I'm like, okay, I'll give you some darkness for the Halloween. Not everybody, but people like that dark side too. So, oh no. I guess when I was young, I liked to explore it, but now it's not really, it's not a big thing for me. But I don't mind because you never know what pulls you into it. So yeah, with the mermaid, I was really drawn to them just because they are part of Sirius. They're top of the line for mystical creatures, right? Everybody knows a mermaid. So I was so happy. And I think that the period that you're talking about might have been a mermaid because, on Instagram or these things, they have these little challenges. And in May, they call it Mermay. So, and you do a mermaid every day for that month of May. So that might have been during that period. But I also have to say, I am a Pisces. So mermaids definitely, yes, no, does have some part of me. And I have a question. This is how I have to ask myself this all the time. So I want to ask you, if you was a mystical creature, like any mystical creature throughout history, what mystical creature would you be?
Well, when I was a kid, I always really liked Pegasus. Yeah.
Who don't?
I think when you were talking about Greek mythology, I was thinking about Clash of the Titans from the 80s.
Yes. What, Hamilton? What's that gorgeous guy?
Mark Hamilton?
No, not Mark. Oh, what's his name? You're talking about the same movie. You're talking about Clash of the Titans. Who was the lead? That handsome guy who played Perseus.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can't remember his name, but he was in LA Law. I remember that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, anyway, we know who we're talking about. Yes, I love that version. That's my favorite version.
But, he found Pegasus, and Pegasus sort of, got him through his journey, or most of it.
Yes, he helped him. It's interesting. So you said that you would be the Pegasus. That would be probably your creature of choice. And you're saying a reason because it just kind of struck a chord with you when you saw the movie?
I don't know. I think I always really, a lot of people fantasize about flying. And so there's a way that you could fly, but also, you could run fast, on the ground and that kind of thing. And then I also think about Rainbow Bright, that cartoon, and she had a Pegasus.
Yes.
As well.
I love it. You see?
And She-Ra, she had a Pegasus. See, all the greats had a Pegasus.
Exactly. Or you're a Pegasus. I love it. That's a good one. I would be probably maybe I would be. So I have a thing with flying too. So I'm thinking of the flight creatures. So I would like to be a human kind of creature. So there are a number of creatures that do fly, but they're not human, like the Pegasus. So I thought maybe a merman might be the creature for me because, swimming is a little bit like flying. So I get that. Then plus I get the water. Plus I'm a Pisces, but I don't know, because I got love for so many of these mystical creatures. It's just so hard to decide.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Mark, can you share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish?
Well, that's a hard question because the person I'm thinking about, I don't even know how to pronounce his name or even if that's the right name, but are you familiar with 100 Years of Solitude?
Sounds familiar, yes.
I forgot his name, but a writer, and I haven't read his work in quite a long time, but the reason that it struck me when you asked that question is because that was the first time I heard about magical realism. So, and 100 Years of Solitude is a book, the first book that I read that incorporated magical realism. And there's also The Alchemist. So I would say a practice that influenced me was magical realism. And the reason I would say magical realism is because it brought fairy tale into adulthood. So meaning that there was fairy tales, and that was my link from after being all into fairy tales and nursery rhymes, but then outgrowing them, and then finding some literature that really spoke to that kind of genre, but was on a more adult level. And that was magical realism and an example of those two books. So I would say that would be a practice. And then after that, I was like, wow, the fairy tale can continue, and it definitely inspired me to continue.
So was there a period in your life, maybe in your teens or early 20s, where you felt like, oh, I need to grow up and I need to let go of these kinds of things? And then you found this book and got inspired to sort of bring it back to your life?
Yes, you get bitter, or at least I got bitter, or I got jaded, or you get disillusioned, or I'm trying to speak from, I got disillusioned, especially not especially, I don't think it's especially hard, but I think it's hard being a Black gay person in the closet. And so the fairy tale just becomes really weird. It becomes you got to wake up to reality and kind of figure that out. And so so I had to let go of it for a little while, suppress it, and then try to then come back into it once I was free again,
Yeah. And put on your wizard hat and your wizard cloak and be magical.
But of course, exactly, to figure out what it means, like for me at this time, this age, what it means for me to actually try to share it with other people. Like, how do you share your magical thinking? And, I just want it to be as fun for me as it is I want it to be fun for other people as fun for me. So how do you do that? So yeah, it takes some time to develop that. But yeah, I got back into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not a fanatic. So I can leave it, that I've also had to have that play with my friends too, because like I said, some friends are like, come on, enough with the play, Mark. I like it sometimes, but this is like, it's getting carried away. And it really have to learn to not push, like I say, not to push, because play only works when two people are willing to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mark, where can people find you and see some of your videos and your art?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm only seeable on Instagram. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Twitter. I don't do anything else. The only thing I am on is Instagram, and that's at Inner Kiddo on Instagram. I will try to broaden my horizons and look into other platforms, maybe even podcasts. Thank you so much, Nick, for having me on this podcast. Let me tell you. And this is my first podcast. I don't even understand really what a podcast is. I still haven't checked out a podcast. This is still completely a new world to me. So I thank you for introducing me to this new world.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here and sharing more about the Academy of Magical Thinking and bringing more joy and fantasy to our mundane adult lives.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it.
I work with many queer folks who struggle to get their needs met or who suffer from having their boundaries violated by others. Because you may not have been cared for the best, you might have a hard time identifying your needs. Or because you have been violated or bullied, you might not completely understand where exactly your boundaries are. If you'd like some help exploring your needs and building more resilient boundaries, head over to my website and download the free guide, Needs, Boundaries, and Self-Care Support for Queer Folks. This is a short introduction to help you start to shift and change your relationship to yourself and others, and to feel more safe and resourced day to day. So just head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/needs to download your free guide today. To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.